Decisions in and of themselves can be a challenge. Put those together with large groups of people, and we can end up having a catastrophe. So let's talk about group relationships. When we look at decision making, which we can address on a number of levels, one of the things we have to consider is how much more complicated it gets when you are within a group dynamic. Now, that can be a family system, it can be a group of friends, or a coworker group, or even an interdisciplinary group, sports team. There's a number of different components that exist to make up a group. Now, in any group, you must have a certain set of criteria. Has to obviously be more than 3 people, or at least 3 people. Your group has to have a shared perception, meaning you have this idea of what is needed, what is wanted, that is pretty much shared amongst you. You're interdependent in some way, so you rely on each other on some level, and you require communication. So it is not an independent job where you don't need to be participating with each other in order to become successful. Now, how does that fit into relationships? Like I said, there's all kinds of relationships. And while within a group situation, there are relationships within groups, the group on its own is this relational experience as well. So when you have a group get together, maybe you're working on a group project, or you're working together to decide as a family where you're going to go on vacation. In those group experiences, when you're making decisions, oftentimes you find that you are either task or relational oriented, sometimes a little of both. What do I mean by that? Task-oriented people are focused solely on completing a task. There's not a need to manage the relationships within the dynamics of the group. Whereas a relational person focuses much more on how the group is communicating and their abilities and the way they work together within the group, as opposed to the task itself. You need both of these within any group. You need to either have a combination amongst many or all of your group members, or you need to have some strong, dedicated leaders that both experience these things and understand that both are necessary. So when you have these leaders, what do they look like? There's a number of types of leadership strategies. What you hear most often about is democratic and autocratic leadership. In a general sense, the democratic leader maintains a more equal status within the group, and they use an often collective approach to decision making, asking for lots and lots of feedback and trying to get everyone involved. Now, when do you use this style? When the group has time to deliberate and hear all sides of an issue, then that's when you use this style. This leadership style promotes inclusion and participation within the decision-making process. So if you have the time, go for it. And again, leadership does not necessarily mean in business. It can mean within a decision-making process for your family, within a decision-making process with your group of friends. Whatever it might be, there's typically at least one leader within that process. Now, in some cases, you'll find that leader to be an autocratic leader. Now, what is that? It is leaders that have more power than the followers and usually make the decisions by themselves. Now, many people think of this as a bad leadership style. And you know what? In many cases, that's right. It is a bad leadership style. But when a quick decision must be made and time doesn't allow for a democratic approach, then you might want to consider using a more firm autocratic style. And that kind of situation might be if there have to be layoffs at work, or you have to make a decision to cut something out of your schedule for the week. You may have to make that an autocratic decision within that family. So these are various leadership styles, and there are many more, but those are just 2 that we would throw out there. When you are in a group and you're making decisions, how do you go through the process? Now, group decision making can be a little bit complicated, but if you follow a strategy, especially in a formal situation, like at work, or if you're trying to make a big decision about, say, where to move, or what job to take, or where your family should go on vacation. I know that doesn't sound big, but especially if there's multiple different opinions, it would be good to see this through in a strategic manner. So when you make these decisions, you want to follow a step-by-step process. The first thing that you want to determine is, what is the problem? What decision is it that we are making? And define it clearly. Understand fully what the issue is. There are times when the problem is actually not what we think it is. Now, this is problem solving / decision making. In some cases, it doesn't feel like a problem. Where do we go on vacation? Well, that doesn't feel like a problem, but it is still something that has to be solved, a decision that has to be made. Now, here is an individualized example, and I think it makes it easier for someone to understand how the process works if you look at it from this perspective. So you have a car and you just totaled it in an accident and you need to purchase a new car immediately. So you have certain requirements for your new vehicle and need to find the best option for you. So you're trying to decide, okay, here's the problem, here's what happened, and here's what I need to do. I need to come to a conclusion here. The next step is to analyze the problem. Determine what are the drivers and what are the restraining forces of that problem. Now, drivers are things that are driving or pushing the problem forward, that's causing you to have the problem. Restraining forces would be things that are holding the solution or restraining the solution from being implemented. So one example might be drivers. In this particular example, the accident you were in and the lack of transportation to your work and school are driving the problem forward. Whereas restraining forces in this example is lack of knowledge about what your car can afford, what car you can afford, and what is available. Now, once you've analyzed the problem, then you can go to identifying criteria for solving the problem. So what must you have in order for it to be a viable solution? What is the most important thing to consider within those solutions? So in our example with the purchasing of a car, you might have a list of criteria. My new car must meet these 3 or 4 or 10 qualifications. So I need it to say be between 6,000 and 8,000 or no more than 8,000. The mileage has to be no greater than 70,000, and I need it to be a large model because I have 3 dogs. Now, once you have identified your criteria, then you can generate solutions or alternatives to the problem-solving task or the decision-making process. Lay out as many solutions as you can come up with. Even if the solution is unlikely, you want to find a full and comprehensive list. You want to think outside the box, as they say. Use your mind to expand and allow everyone else to kind of put in their 2 points as well. You want everybody to have their opinion heard. Now, in this case, a potential problem solutions would be to get a used car that fits all my criteria or a minimum of criteria and then take out a loan, say if it was too expensive. Purchase a car for under the budget that does not fit all my criteria, or don't purchase a car and ride the bus everywhere. It just depends on what you can come up with. Just get as many solutions as you can think of and honestly consider each one. How would it feel? What would it be like to ride the bus everywhere? Can you imagine the financial difference without having to pay for gas and being able to, go where you want to go without costing you taxes and gas money and insurance and all of that? But maybe that's not feasible. So think about what options there are. Now, once you've generated your solutions, then you can choose one or more and test them or evaluate them or their alternatives. So go through each possible solution and match them up with your criteria. Whichever matches the most criteria should be your first attempt. If that doesn't work, then you can go into a different path. So the first solution that I mentioned earlier for mine is the one that fits the most criteria. I'm going to attempt that solution. So going back, if you remember, the first solution was to purchase a used car with all the criteria. Well, I'm going to try that because that's what I want first, but it may not work. If the solution doesn't work because, for example, there are no cars available like I want, I will consider solutions 2 or 3 because, as I mentioned, I'm kind of thinking I might check that last one off the box because it wasn't working as well in my opinion of what would be successful. So this is the group decision-making process. Each step leads you to an educated and well thought out, well planned decision. And hopefully, once you have these kind of worked out in a strategic manner, you're able to quickly move through the process in more relaxed decision-making situations.